Episode what?
I don't know.
Waterloo, today's non-sponsor. If anything ever happens where we can get Waterloo as a sponsor, we will accept.
Yes.
Perfect. We should have
right.
done it in the mics, actually.
Yeah.
Tom Holly was supposed to be here. We're not thrilled that he's not here, but he did have a pretty good excuse.
That's what he says anyway.
Do you believe him?
I'm slightly skeptical.
Okay, so he did have a really good excuse. We're not going to talk about it, but it was almost like I was on the way and I had this weird feeling that he was going to text about something.
Well, and we hadn't heard from him at all. Like, basically we said, hey, you want to do a video with us? And he's like, yeah, for sure. And then there was nothing else from that. And then it was literally, we were supposed to meet at 10 o'clock and it was 9:58 when we heard from him.
So
just makes me wonder. But anyway, apparently he's got health problems in the family. This is what he says. So all love to Todd.
All love, and we wish the best for that situation.
Yes, I hope that I hope everything is good with Tom Hollywood.
Definitely.
But anyway, now there's a vacant seat over here. We had 3 Lulus.
Now we're
ready
down
to go.
2. Cheers.
Cheers to the Lulus. This episode also sponsored by Modern Realty for the audio equipment. So gracious. But today, anyway, we're talking about pricing, Ky Guy.
Pricing.
The most critical, I think, step for a seller, decision that a seller is going to make in the home selling process. Would you agree?
I would most certainly agree.
Up there, at least. Besides getting the house ready. Getting the house ready is critical, but pricing the house is critical too. So what do you think would be the biggest mistake a seller could make as it relates to their pricing?
I think the biggest mistake as it relates to pricing is overpricing the home.
Overpricing the house.
Because in real estate, when a lot of people instinctively want to start high, knowing we can always come down.
The old, give us room to dicker.
But from what I learned early on, still very true, it is not like selling anything else out of your garage or anything like that. There's a good image that we use in a lot of our roadmaps that shows the pricing pyramid, where as you price a home higher, you're bringing in a less percentage of buyers from what the actual market value may be, versus when you price it fairly or more competitively, you're going to be bringing in a lot higher percentage of buyers in that first initial week of being hot, fresh on the listing, where you're on the hot sheets, you're up on the charts with Zillow, Realtor, all the national sites as well. So it's very important that you price it as accurately as possible, or even slightly competitively compared to what active competition you have that's out there, or what closed comparables you have, because that's what's going to drive more traffic. And when it comes down to getting multiple interest in the property, I mean, obviously the last several years we've seen a lot of multiple offer scenarios.
Yeah.
It doesn't, while price is the most important, if you have multiple interested buyers and everybody's writing escalation clauses and things like that, that's how you're going to get the most bang for your buck when you're selling your house. But aside from that, there's a lot of other variables that come into play when you're talking about a multiple offer situation, and that's the home inspection, the appraisal, the occupancy period. So the more interest you have in your home, the more buyers you have interested, the higher chance you have of getting the most favorable terms, not only with price point, but a lot of those other hurdles that can get in the way of the closing table.
Yeah. A lot of people don't realize, obviously the price is the main thing that sellers care about and that buyers care about. There's 26 line items on a purchase agreement.
Right.
Most purchases, that's our purchase agreement, but most are fairly the same. And obviously you want the best price possible, but you also want to give yourself a chance to get a lot of those other contingencies or other terms in a purchase agreement to be more favorable to you as well. And like you said, you drive up the likelihood of that happening based on your pricing strategy. And a good analogy that I like to use when I'm helping a seller understand pricing dynamics and starting to formulate a strategy as it relates to their pricing is It's like dropping a piece of bread into a pond. You've heard me say this a million times.
It truly is.
What you're doing is when you list your house, you are introducing something into an ecosystem of buyers. So think of it like a pond full of fish. When you drop a little piece of bait or a little piece of bread into the pond, you're going to get a bunch of buyers. They're all going to come and look at what's new in their ecosystem. There's something that just came into their world, and they're going to take a look at it, and they're going to peck at it, and they're all going to check it out. And either there's going to be a feeding frenzy, and they're all going to go and fight each other over it,
right,
or they're going to peck at it, and everybody's going to have a look at it and determine they're not interested, and off they go. But the longer that piece of bread sits in the water, it doesn't get any more delicious.
Right.
So the longer you sit on the market, the perceived market value is going down. So a lot of sellers, this is a critical mistake, and this is not two real estate agents, by the way, just trying to tell you to price your house low. Because I wouldn't advise a seller to price their house low. I would advise a seller to price their house, to make a decision where to price their house within a spectrum, so that they are more likely to get what they want.
Right. And I think another important factor is a lot of buyers that, especially people that have been in the market and may not have been successful with, securing a new home or something yet, is we're so used to the dynamic of the multiple offers and houses going above asking price.
There's a serious recency
there's a
bias
lot of frustration with that, but a lot of these buyers entering the market and agents, especially new agents, that only know this side of real estate, is like there's not a lot of people being coached into, pitching a lower offer right when a house hits the market. But if you get a nice wave of traffic and you miss the mark because you started too high, you have to be careful with that, because now you've had this wave of traffic that came and went. And I like to think that in today's market, you get a really good, if you're not super comfortable when you're talking about different ranges on the higher end, lower end, or what the middle ground is, you can very much determine kind of where you sit just from that first week of feedback and analysis. And I almost find it better to try to find that true market value sooner than later. Like, if you have
there's no question.
If you have a couple weeks go by and you did get a lot of good traffic, but you're missing the mark, that's the biggest indicator that maybe right then and there is a perfect time to make a reduction, try to find that value while you're still fairly fresh. Because like you mentioned, when we're talking about that perceived market value over time, the longer a house is sitting on the market, the more especially other buyers and new buyers that are entering the market are wondering why it's sitting there. It must be overpriced. There's something wrong with the house, and then that's where you get yourself in more of a pickle situation.
Yeah, that's a principle that we call chasing the market. So what happens is let's say that this is your market value, for better or for worse, whatever it is, okay? Let's say that we price here. This is going to give ourselves room to dicker, right? We gotta have a little bit of dickering room here. Well, here's what happens. All the buyers, they come, they go, and they generally all come in within, it depends on your market, but let's say 10 to 14 days, okay? They come, they go. And then what you end up getting is every time a new fish is dropped into the pond or a new buyer comes into the market, they might come and take a look at you, right?
Yeah.
But what's happening is the longer the house is on the market, the perceived market value is going down. So the buyers just start to believe that it's not worth what you're asking. This is called time decay, or what we refer to as time decay. So what happens is that while the perceived market value is going down, you're on the market here. What do? You drop the price. Then you sit on the market, and you drop the price. So imagine a line going like this and a little stair step going like this.
We have a nice graphic.
There's a graphic. I'll put it up on the screen. This is what we call chasing the market. But here's the thing. It doesn't only hurt you in that way. Because while you're chasing the market, let's say 6 months goes by.
Yep.
6 more mortgage payments. 6 more months of interest.
Utility payments.
6 more months of utilities. 6 more months of taxes, what we call the cost of holding. So it's important to understand. And again, don't price your house low. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is here's another thing that I teach my clients. Your listing price is 2 things, but how much your house is worth is not one of them. What I mean by that is that what you list your price for has no bearing, or what you list your house for has no bearing on how much your house is going to sell for.
Right.
It's crazy to even say it or think about it, but that's true. Your house is two things, or the listing price on your house is two things. The first thing is it's a guess.
Yep.
So we're going to gather up all the information. This is what us real estate agents do. We call it a CMA, or a comparative market analysis. We're gathering up as much information about other houses that are similar that have sold in the market. This is telling us what willing and able buyers are purchasing houses that are like yours. Okay. Then this is generally going to give us a range. Usually is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, the market is suggesting that we are going to compete within this particular range. The second thing is it's a strategy. So now that we have a guess, now we need to decide, we need to strategize where inside that range we want to attempt to compete.
Yep.
So whether or not we want to go for the top end of that range, and hey, maybe hopefully we get it, or do we want to price at the lower end of the range? The higher you price within that range of what you believe, what your guess is, the less likely you are to get a frenzied reaction by the market. Mm-hmm. The lower you price, the more likely you are.
I think the higher end comes from when you're not working with a ton of data. You have a good idea, but you're also kind of the one who's testing that market. You're testing that value in some situations.
Yeah, you're guessing.
And I think that's the most appropriate time to kind of reach. But if you have, if you're in the city limits and you're a single story house, let's say 3-bed, 2-bed,
2-bath,
you're likely going to have a lot more data than you are if you're somebody on the outskirts of town.
Yeah, or if you live in a metropolitan area or somewhere where there's tons of population or whatever.
Right.
For our market, we live in the middle of Michigan. If we're comping a house in Midland,
yeah,
it's going to be very different as it relates to the amount of information we have available to us if we're comping a house in Gladwin.
Right.
There's just less population up there, less homes, less transactions.
A lot of that range just comes from how much data you actually have and how much how many comparables you have to work off of.
Also, another little tidbit is that I did a big deep dive research and did a video on Zillow's estimates, automated value estimators, and their margin of error is directly in correlation to the populations of the area. So if you are looking at Zestimates in San Diego, where there's going to be tons, or Austin, Texas, or something like that, there's going to be tons of information. That margin of error is actually very little. It's very, very close.
Right.
But if you're comping in the middle of Wyoming,
right,
it's going to be massive. It's going to be 50%, and then the average is somewhere about 9%, but that's 9% in either direction.
Yeah.
So more like almost 20% margin of error. So if you're looking at these estimates, don't put too much into it unless I guess you live in like Dallas.
I found some situations they more often lately they've been a lot closer in terms of a range for me personally. I know years and years ago they were really bad.
Yeah, the CEO famously sold his house for $100,000 less than his estimate.
Yeah,
the CEO of Zillow.
So, but I mean, for the most part, we know they don't have a way to take into consideration of the condition of the property, what finishes are in the property.
Yeah, because they're valuing every house.
They're gathering a range based off of the the square footage, the bed, bath, and what they know. In some cases, there might be missing information from certain comps other than just the finishes. So they're hard to trust. Just get with your local real estate professional.
Yeah, and understand that it's going to put you in a ballpark. Think about 25%. So it'll tell you if you think your house is worth $500,000 and this estimate is $300,000, your house isn't worth $5,000.
Right.
I think they're close enough to make that determination. But if you have a real estate professional that's done a thoughtful comparative market analysis and they believe that your range is going to be between 250 and 275, but this estimate is saying you're worth 3.25 or something like that, I would probably heed to the advice.
And sometimes even the high end of the estimates range is on the low end.
Yeah.
I've had houses I go to where I'm like, all right, well, because it's always fun to just look at, like, I'm always doing my own comps in the MLS, obviously, but, you know, I'll take into consideration of like what Realtor's coming up with, what Zillow's coming up with, just to kind of see what range they're seeing and if there's any comps that are missing that might have been in a different board or something like that. I think it's important to do all of that due diligence. But I've went into, you know, a new listing appointment where I kind of have a good idea, or I think it's similar to that range, and then I get there and I go, whoa, okay, I think, you know, we might be 25K higher than the high end of what this range is showing.
Yeah.
And I'm not like spewing that out, but in my head, I'm like,
yeah, sometimes I use Zillow as a decent starting point or validation if I'm looking for confluence in you know, in data points. You know, I'll look and say, okay, well, this is my opinion, and this suggests that, and this suggests that. Okay, now I'm looking at the automated value estimator.
Yep.
This is saying the same thing. It kind of validates a notion, but yeah. So the next thing would be how, and we hear this all the time, and it's something that kind of drives me nuts, to be honest. How much somebody paid for a house. Whether they're the seller or the buyer.
Yep.
You know, I was reading a study, and they say that a psychological study says that the thought of losing is 2.5 times more profound of a feeling than the thought of winning.
Yeah.
2.5 times. So the thought of losing money on your house hurts 2.5 times more than the thought of having $10,000 worth of equity in your house. The thought of losing $10,000.
Yeah.
So this is another thing. A lot of times sellers will say, and I'll say too, I've been doing this a long time. You've been doing this a long time. I've seen different markets. Then, you know, we don't necessarily sit on the recency bias that anybody that maybe would have started in real estate in the last 5 years. They literally have never seen a bear market. They've never seen a market going down. And frankly, I haven't either, but I've seen much different markets.
Yeah.
We've been on a hell of a bull run for 5 straight years. But I've worked in a market that the average days on market was 47 days. That's a normal, very average time. But a lot of the time, people just cannot. They say, well, I can't sell it for less than what I bought it for.
Right.
And very seldom are you going to have to, but it is possible that the house is not worth. And I think we're coming into it.
Yeah,
I really do. The premiums that there's no data points suggesting prices are tanking or going down or whatever. There's just nothing retrospectively
to me,
that's telling us that.
It seems like it's just kind of been at a like leveling out.
It's
there's been a little more time on market. There's still been a lot of multiple offer scenarios with the, you know, houses that are priced accurately, turnkey situations. I'm still seeing a lot of these multiple offer situations, even in higher price demographics. But
that's what shocked me
in the last we went through
because we just went head to head on one. But I'm representing a client right now that's in a fairly high price range, in a price range historically, at least in our market, that is not full of a pond that's not full of fish.
Right.
It's got a couple fish in them. They're big fish. They're hard to catch and they're big fish. But the market in our market is quite saturated with $500,000 buyers, which has never been in my career.
Yeah.
And I would argue to say that the client that I'm representing right now, specifically, this has been the most competitive price range of any client I've represented probably in the last 18 months.
Yeah.
And in any price range. And it used to be, the 175 and the 2.25 and the 2.5. This is the 4 to 5.
Yeah.
And we almost can't get a damn showing in some cases. And we're looking for pocket listings. We're looking for pre-market opportunities and everything because we're just getting boxed out in every. So, just a little tidbit on that.
And with I'll say, that higher price range, it's almost like when you have multiple buyers, they've all got the capital. So it's boiling more down to who's waiving the inspection.
Yeah.
Who's waiving the appraisal? Who's giving the seller, 30 days of rent-free occupancy.
Right.
You know, all these other.
Yeah, who's sweetening the deal? Who's getting into those other 26, 25 line items besides just the purchase price? The purchase price is king. I'll say that. Nothing matters more than the purchase price. But yeah, when you run out of buying power.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we're seeing the market sort of soften, is just because the buyers are so much less frenzied in most price ranges because they're running out of buying power.
Yeah.
You know, 3-4 years ago they were on 3.5% rates. They just had so much buying power, and now they got much less buying power. You have to be pretty capital intensive to really bully anybody, especially in the higher end price ranges. But yeah, I thought that study was interesting. It's like a behavioral research study that says the thought of losing is 2.5 times more of a profound of a feeling than.
Yep, the negative stuff seems to put a heavier damper on folks.
Yeah, we have negativity biases. We don't, as real estate agents, right?
But I think you left off on. We kind of went on a tangent. We were talking about people, you know, looking at what the house last sold for as part of.
Yeah. So you got the seller, but most sellers, they can't stomach the thought. They would just, it doesn't matter what the data says or whether or not anything is suggesting their house could sell for more than what they bought it for. But what I was saying is I think we're coming into it because of the premiums that everybody have been paying in the last 3 years. You know, they have so much less equity than any of the sellers in the prior 3 years prior to that.
Right.
So I do believe that that's going to unfortunately exacerbate the inventory deficiency. Simply buyers just cannot, or sellers cannot.
This reminds me of a house I recently looked at in another area where we wrote a good offer on the property. And then the agent ended up getting back with me that the mortgage that was still owed was like $10,000. Or with the closing fees and stuff for the seller, the seller would need to have sold it for like $10,000 more than what they had it listed for. I'm like, well,
how's this going to work?
This is not a. How is this situation even happening? I mean, I guess you would think they would know that beforehand, right?
Yeah. Could you imagine writing a check to sell your house? I've represented clients that did have to.
I mean, it just depends on your circumstances when you have to move, and then the market's going to tell you. It's a snapshot in time of where you stand with the data, and you have to always take that into consideration for, one, your pricing strategy, and another is, you know, it's very likely that your buyer is going to be financing it with a mortgage, and then there's going to be an appraisal requirement, and they're going to have to look at what data is available. Not that you couldn't find a cash buyer. That's more popular these days, but it's still.
Yeah, it still represents probably under 10% of trans. Maybe right around 10. Probably between 10 and 15% of transactions are cash deals.
Yeah,
but it's a low probability play. Like if your objective as a seller is to only sell to cash.
Yeah, financial terms, cash only.
Yeah,
but it will go FHA. But we're looking for cash.
Yeah, we don't want to deal with the
appraisal.
Yeah. But yeah, it's one of those things where you're just everything in real estate, in my opinion, we talk about it all the time in the company that we work for, is it deals in likelihoods.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and because there's no way any real estate agent that's ever going to try to tell you anything that's for sure your house is going to sell for this is how much it's worth. They're just not being honest with you. I'm gonna keep it real.
Yeah,
that's a lie.
I agree.
Nobody knows.
I think it's too dangerous to just tell. You can be confident in in your range, you know, but you can't be like adamant about how specific it's going to be.
Yeah, and I've done that before.
You can't do that.
I've done that before.
Because you will put yourself in a bad position if you're wrong.
Yep, I got fired. Yep, I tell you what, I was so damn certain. This was a long time ago. Nice house for $100,000, Bullet Creek, and
when you could get a house for $100,000
for $100,000, yeah, nice 3.2, no basement, nice detached 2-car garage. I swore it was worth $100,000, smack on the nose. But and all I did was spend every ounce of energy that I had trying to convince the seller of that. She interviewed another agent. He thought it was worth closer to 120. I told her she's
Excuse me,
crazy.
the water will get you.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. You get the burps with the Lulus, bro. But I told her, and again, I spent all my energy trying to tell her why her house was worth $100,000 instead of 120. And I took a very, very firm posture with her. She listed her house for $120,000 and got it day one. Dead wrong. If she would have listened to me, it would have cost her 20,000 American dollars. And that just goes to show you that nobody knows for sure. I couldn't believe it. I was dumbfounded. She fired me, obviously, and I don't blame her. And she hired the agent that told her house was worth 120.
Yeah,
I won't name any names, but good for her. For one, I was a much younger agent, much less mature, and now I understand its likelihoods. I just listed a house, just sold it. Every comp, every piece of data was telling me 215 to 250. Somewhere in that range. Mm-hmm. Sold it for 290. But wow. I didn't take a firm posture. I knew going into it that, for one, I had very limited data, and it was a very unique house, 7-bedroom house. I mean, there's not a hell of a lot of 7-bedroom houses, and how is the market going to react to 7 bedrooms as it compares to 4+, which is basically when I'm comping anything over 4, I'm just comping to 4+, because you're just not going to get any comps with 6-7 bedrooms. And we sold for $290, and I knew that it was a possibility, even though I didn't think it was going to happen. Nothing was telling me, nothing was suggesting that to me. Yeah. But I knew that it was possible. So it's one of those things that I've learned that we deal in likelihoods.
I think again, it's okay to test in certain scenarios, to kind of test that market and test that higher value. And sometimes you surprise yourself, but that goes to show that the market always corrects itself for better or for worse. You're either going to have multiple interested buyers at the price point you go out at, or you miss the mark and you got to quickly go back to the drawing board and try to get that corrected, get that interest back before you're sitting too long and people get eerie on your property.
Yeah, so don't forget to evaluate the market's reaction to your pricing strategy. That's another thing, is you can never really be wrong. Yeah. The only thing that you can be wrong about is being hell-bent on a price. Yeah. If the market is just clearly not supporting the price, the longer you stay at that price, the more likely you are to realize damages, to really lose money that could be on the table. Because like we said, when you're chasing the market, you got 6 months worth of cost of holding. You could have sold for here, but instead 6 months later you sell for this much. Yeah. And that's real damages. That's real monetary loss. So the last thing that I want to talk about is pricing at whole numbers. And you hear me talk about this all the time. I swear to God, I don't understand it, because I feel very strongly. I always price at whole numbers, and I haven't always priced at whole numbers in my career, but ever since I really figured it out, I always price at whole numbers. I always advise pricing at whole numbers. Do you price at whole numbers?
I've taken it more into consideration because you just lately how you've kind of hammered this whole thing at me a few times, but I'm not opposed to, I guess to me, I don't think it's as big of a deal as like, going to, I don't like the look of like, let's say $249,999. No. Yeah.
$1.
That's ridiculous.
But even $100.
I see people do that, and I think that's ridiculous. But I don't mind, the $249,995 or something like that. I don't.
So for $500.
But I also look at that. I also look at the target market analysis, that tool we look at in our board, where it shows
this is where I really learned this.
Yeah, the $5,000 increments. You find a range of where all the buyers are looking. I love looking at that data point and using that, because you can see, okay, if you're kind of in a range, now you can see that where the majority of the buyers are hunting.
Right. Where is the market saturated with buyers?
Right.
But here's the thing. And this is why I feel so strongly. I understand the anatomy of a buyer. Buyers search to and from whole numbers.
Right.
So if I have a listing that I want to price for $300,000 and I price it at $299,000, for one, I'm not gaining any psychological advantage. We're talking a $500,000 or $250,000 transaction here.
Right.
I'm not fooling anybody into thinking that they're paying less by pricing it this way. That's the first thing. We're like you said, we're not selling a used car out of our garage. We're selling a house. That's the first thing. The second thing is that every buyer that's in the market in that range is going to be searching either to or from $300,000. So if you are pricing your house at $299,000 instead of $300,000, what you've just done is alienated anybody who's looking from $300,000. You simply will not exist in their search inquiry. They're not seeing you.
Okay, yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
That makes a good point with the search, because you're saying beyond that price
right,
point.
Because
now it's just under that.
Right. So
you're getting everybody up to that.
Exactly.
Which is very important, but beyond that, they might miss.
Right.
They might miss that notification.
But by pricing at $300,000 instead of $299,000, you are getting both. And furthermore, for anybody looking, let's say from $275,000 to $300,000, you are the best house in their range.
Right.
Anybody looking, let's say from $300,000 to $325,000, you're the best value in their range. You're getting the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
You're not fooling anybody by pricing your house at $299,500. Oh yeah, I got it for less than $300,000. No, you didn't. You got it for $300,000 American dollars. That's how much you paid for it.
Yeah.
So my job as a listing agent is to maximize exposure, and the risk to reward ratio there are agents that are just set in their ways. No matter how I explain this to them, they will just never come off of thinking that it is in their client's best interest to list the dang house at $299,000 instead of $300,000. And God bless them.
Yeah.
Go knock yourself out. But
no, I can agree. I can totally agree. And
So-
I'm trying to think. Like, I don't even remember the last time I priced one.
Very seldom do you see
like
listings
that,
priced at a whole number.
And I can't even remember like what the conversation might have been on that, but
And I always say $5,000, but there's tons of studies that I've done that say that $25,000 increments are psychological levels. So think 250, 275, 300.
right.
So if you're kind of turmoiling in between, I think that we're going to price in this range or whatever, your best likelihood, you'll notice on the target market analysis that the big surges in buyer saturation are at those big psychological levels. But if you're really trying to hone it in, I say 5,000. Mm-hmm. The $5,000 and $10,000 increments are pick one.
That's the increments I always use.
Yep, pick one. If you're thinking 287, do 285 or do 290. But price it at a whole number. Buyers are looking to and from whole numbers, and that's just the way that it is. Mm-hmm. They're if you're looking from 300 to 325, you're not looking at 299 to 325. You got a price bracket in your query that's to and from a whole number.
Agreed upon.
All right. I really feel strongly about this. Have we said enough?
I think we have.
All right.
You took my line.
34 minutes.
I actually got that line from a doctor. I was on the phone a couple of years ago.
I say it all the time.
And that's how he ended the phone call. He was like, "Have we said enough?" And I said, yeah, I think we have. It just totally
perfect.
I'm like, I'm going to use that now.
You can just insert it anywhere and
great.
just end a
Yeah.
conversation very nicely.
Yeah.
With just saying,
I
have
love
we
it.
said enough? So anyway, all right. Thanks to Modern Realty for the microphones, and Logan, you the man. If you liked it, go ahead, like it, and do we subscribe? I guess I put it on YouTube.
Yeah, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, do whatever. Actually, don't do anything if that's what you want to do. Don't like it.
Comment below if you want to see Tom in the next episode.
Yeah.
Or Tyler Do Russell.
Yeah. Or don't comment. You could do that too.
But comment.
Okay, bye.